In a ruling that has sent shockwaves through the heart of Westminster, the Supreme Court has issued an extraordinary rebuke of Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer, implicating him in a far-reaching financial misconduct scandal that could threaten the very survival of his premiership. In a moment without precedent in modern British political history, the United Kingdom's most senior judge has broken the judiciary's long-standing convention of silence to deliver a withering public statement. Dame Sukkar, Chief Justice of the United Kingdom, accused the Prime Minister of sustained financial impropriety, casting serious doubt over his suitability for high office. Delivered during a nationally televised session of the court, the judgment unveiled a series of damning allegations involving undisclosed financial arrangements, misleading declarations, and conduct that the judiciary deemed fundamentally incompatible with the expectations of public service. The ruling detailed a web of questionable land deals, lavish gifts, and unreported income, matters that had reportedly been under quiet investigation by financial regulators and judicial authorities for over a year. This was not political theatre nor partisan conjecture. It was the Supreme Court speaking with the full weight of legal authority. Internal court documents, released hours after Dame Sukkar's address, revealed that Sir Keir had repeatedly failed to declare personal financial gains, had wrongly claimed luxury items as work-related expenses, and had omitted crucial details in property transactions. Among the most glaring concerns was a $124,000 discrepancy related to the 2022 sale of land owned by Starmer's family. Another involved more than $39,000 worth of high-end gifts allegedly received from Lord Wad Ali, a prominent Labour donor and media mogul. These gifts reportedly included bespoke Italian suits, engraved Rolex watches, and premium travel upgrades. Leaked emails obtained by journalists appear to corroborate the court's findings. In one message, Starmer is said to have personally thanked Lord Ali for a particular suit, describing it as a magnificent fit for the victory speech, a reference to an event held days before Starmer announced tax reforms seen as highly favourable to media investors. The Supreme Court stopped short of levelling a charge of bribery, yet the implication of undue influence was clear. Dame Sukkar declared that the Prime Minister's actions had seriously undermined public trust and transgressed ethical standards integral to British democratic life. When financial conduct corrodes faith in the executive, she said, the judiciary cannot remain silent, and silent we shall not be. The revelations stem from an initial whistleblower report by a mid-level official at HMRC, who flagged anomalies in Starmer's tax records. The ensuing inquiry uncovered approximately $302,220 in personal perks and luxury items accumulated over a 3-year period, none of which had been formally disclosed. The court concluded these omissions were not accidental, but deliberate and strategic. The political ramifications were immediate and seismic. Broadcasters across the UK suspended scheduled programming to report on the court's announcement. Politicians across party lines expressed astonishment. Senior Conservative MPs described it as a day of reckoning, while the Liberal Democrats demanded urgent parliamentary action. Even within Labour's own ranks, backbenchers responded with a stunned and telling silence. Yet perhaps the most powerful response came not from Parliament, but from the public. For countless Britons already grappling with rising living costs, stagnant earnings, and unfulfilled political promises, the ruling appeared to confirm their deepest cynicism, that the man who had vowed transparency and integrity was himself leading a duplicitous life, one for public display, and another for private accounting. Arguably, the scandal's most damning element is not monetary, but moral. Integrity, or the absence thereof, now defines the crisis engulfing Sir Keir. The Supreme Court's censure was not anchored in the value of the undeclared benefits, but in the corrosive impact such misconduct has upon democratic norms. As Dame Sukkar stated, Starmer's repeated failure to disclose material financial assistance, and his refusal to amend the record even after being confronted, renders him unfit to occupy the highest executive office. While the Supreme Court lacks the constitutional authority to unseat a sitting Prime Minister, its call for resignation carries significant moral force. With each passing day that Sir Keir Starmer remains in office, the legitimacy of his leadership appears to weaken further. And the scandal has already claimed its first political victim. Within a single day of the Supreme Court's seismic ruling, the political aftershocks reverberated across Whitehall. A senior Treasury advisor tendered their resignation within 24 hours, an early tremor that many now believe heralds a broader exodus from government ranks. Sir Keir Starmer has thus far offered only a terse and perfunctory denial, insisting there was no intentional wrongdoing. Yet that assertion is already wearing thin. For many observers, the Prime Minister's response fails to withstand the gravity of what is now widely regarded as a full-blown constitutional crisis. For the first time in living memory, the highest judicial authority in the United Kingdom has publicly declared that a sitting Prime Minister has compromised the ethical foundations of his office. A tipping point has undeniably been reached. Whether Starmer digs in his heels or yields to mounting political pressure, one truth is now beyond dispute: British politics has crossed a threshold from which it cannot return. Within hours of the court's announcement, the Labour Party, long the bedrock of Starmer's power, began to fracture. In the north of England, local councillors who once formed the loyal backbone of Starmer's electoral coalition began distancing themselves from the national leadership. Their statements were scathing, citing betrayal, disillusionment, and shame. These were not the cautious murmurings of internal discontent, but clarion calls of open rebellion. The uprising was no longer latent, it was erupting in full view. Then came the real political earthquake. Labour MPs themselves began to call for a vote of no confidence. Not the Conservatives, not Reform UK, but Starmer's own parliamentary colleagues. MPs who had for years stood in quiet loyalty, or at least silent restraint, were now preparing to oust him. Party sources spoke of a complete collapse of internal discipline. Senior members were reportedly drafting emergency plans for a leadership contest, contingencies for a post-Starmer Labour Party. The message could not have been clearer: if he would not resign, they were prepared to remove him. Yet the Prime Minister remained defiant. Standing outside 10 Downing Street at a visibly strained press conference, Starmer denied all accusations. Dismissing the Supreme Court's findings as political theatre cloaked in judicial language, he declared with icy resolve, "I will not be stepping down." The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. In accusing the UK's highest court of partisan bias, Starmer had crossed a line even his fiercest critics had not anticipated. His comments were met with swift condemnation from across the legal community. Former Supreme Court Justice Lord Neuberger denounced the remarks as deeply reckless, warning that undermining judicial independence was a perilous step for any democratic leader. The Law Society issued a rare public statement defending Chief Justice Dame Sue Carr's intervention, calling her actions both lawful and necessary. What had begun as a tax controversy had morphed into an unprecedented constitutional standoff. Beyond the halls of Westminster, the fury was escalating. Protesters gathered outside Parliament brandishing placards that read, $39,000 reasons to resign, and we deserve better. Television channels cancelled scheduled programming in favour of rolling coverage, dissecting every clause of the court's ruling, reporting a cascade of resignations, and tracking the fraying seams of power within Number 10. Inside Downing Street, chaos reigned. Advisors were dismissed, legal teams worked around the clock, and divisions within Starmer's inner circle deepened. Anonymous insiders described the atmosphere as one of meltdown. Even more ominously, whispers of potential criminal prosecution began circulating in legal and political circles. What was once deemed politically sensitive but legally distant had now become, in the eyes of some experts, a matter for the Crown Prosecution Service. Though no court has yet issued a criminal charge, the verdict of public opinion appears to have already been delivered. The man who once vowed to restore honour to British politics now stands accused of sullying the very institution he sought to reform. The Prime Minister's grip on power is breaking. The day following the Supreme Court's historic rebuke, Sir Keir Starmer entered the House of Commons to an atmosphere of deafening silence. No jeering from the opposition. No applause from his own benches. Just a heavy, echoing void. Members of the front bench averted their gaze. Allies looked away. It was a moment thick with symbolism. The Prime Minister's political immunity had evaporated. Then came the letters. Backbench MPs began writing to the 1922 committee, initiating the very mechanism that had precipitated the downfall of Boris Johnson. The machinery of political reckoning had been set in motion. And with it, the end of an era drew closer. This time, it wasn't about slipping poll numbers or a poorly chosen soundbite. It was about something far more profound: legitimacy. Could a Prime Minister remain in office while under open judicial condemnation? The answer, once debated behind closed doors, was now being asked aloud across the nation. And increasingly, it was becoming impossible to deny. Yet Sir Keir Starmer did not retreat. In a second, even more combative press briefing, he escalated his rhetoric, accusing the judiciary of interfering with the democratic will of the people. The remark, unprecedented in modern political discourse, sparked immediate alarm across the legal and academic establishment. Professor Mark Elliott of the University of Cambridge labelled the Prime Minister's statement deeply irresponsible, warning that such language flirted dangerously with authoritarianism. Even The Guardian, typically sympathetic to Labour, ran a scathing editorial under the headline, "Starmer has lost the moral authority to govern." And behind the scenes, the cracks widened. Key donors began to withdraw financial support. One prominent financier, speaking to The Times, put it starkly, "We supported a man of the law. What we got is a man evading it." Within the Treasury, internal memos revealed institutional paralysis. Senior civil servants reportedly admitted they were uncertain whether to heed directives from Downing Street or to defer to the Supreme Court. Resignations continued to accumulate at a pace unseen in decades. Then came the final blow. A leaked memorandum from the Crown Prosecution Service confirmed that an exploratory review was underway into Starmer's failure to disclose financial interests, an investigation that could fall under potential breaches of the ministerial code. The irony was both staggering and bitter. The former Director of Public Prosecutions now found himself under the scrutiny of the very institution he once led. The political opposition moved swiftly. Nigel Farage proclaimed it the end of Labour's so-called moral crusade. The Scottish National Party demanded a snap general election. Even the Liberal Democrats, often cautious in their tone, called for a caretaker government to stabilise the country. But perhaps the most devastating blow of all came not from across the aisle, but from within Starmer's own inner circle. Deputy Labour leader Angela Rayner broke her silence in a late-night interview that reverberated across the nation. "We must respect our legal institutions," she said. "No one is above scrutiny, not even the Prime Minister." Her words were measured, but their intent was unmistakable. The dam had burst. The knives were out. By the end of the week, Downing Street had become a fortress under siege, politically, legally, personally. Protesters encircled Number 10. Advisers departed in droves. The press office fell silent. Starmer was no longer leading a government, he was merely enduring it. The man who had built his career on the principles of law and order now stood in open conflict with the legal system he once upheld. His legacy, once tethered to reform and integrity, was disintegrating in real time. The siege of Starmer, as commentators began to call it, was no longer a political scandal. It had become a reckoning. And then, the signature. A seemingly innocuous scribble, just a single line of ink on a scanned PDF, broke what little defense the Prime Minister had left. The document, leaked to multiple media outlets, authorized a transfer of $128,000 into a Luxembourg-based holding account. It was signed by Keir Starmer just 2 months before he assumed leadership of the Labour Party. The revelation ignited an inferno. News outlets splashed the signature across front pages. Broadcasters ran the image on an endless loop. What had begun as a story of undeclared income had now mutated into something far more damning. Had the man who styled himself as Britain's moral compass been operating, in private, like a seasoned tax avoider? The opposition wasted no time. In Parliament, Nigel Farage thundered across the dispatch box, this wasn't an oversight. This was an offshore escape plan. Starmer hasn't just lost the room, he's lost the country. This was no longer merely a matter of poor judgment or blurred ethical lines. It was a betrayal of public trust on an unprecedented scale, financial malpractice cloaked in the rhetoric of righteousness. What had begun as murmurs of misconduct had erupted into a full-blown national crisis. And now, even within Labour, panic was taking hold. The Scottish National Party openly called for criminal charges. Inside the Labour hierarchy, damage control morphed into outright retreat. Angela Rayner's office issued a swift and pointed statement denying any prior knowledge of offshore transactions, a calculated move that clearly signaled preparation for a leadership vacuum. The Serious Fraud Office launched an emergency investigation. The Bar Council, normally reticent in political matters, condemned Starmer's conduct as grossly unethical. For a man who had built his reputation on legal exactitude and moral clarity, it was a spectacular fall from grace. The public's response was instantaneous and unforgiving. Labour's once comfortable lead in the polls evaporated overnight. Constituency offices across the country reported mass resignations. Donations vanished. On social media, Starmer became the face of hypocrisy. Edited clips of him pledging to clean up politics were reposted by the millions, each branded with a single word, liar. Within Whitehall, the machinery of government began to seize. The Cabinet Office ordered all ministers to disclose 5 years of financial records, a clear message that the rot at the top would no longer be ignored. Then came the knock. 2 plainclothes officers from Scotland Yard entered Downing Street via a discreet rear entrance. No arrests were made, but Starmer was formally invited to attend a voluntary interview under caution, a seismic development. No sitting British Prime Minister in modern history had ever faced such legal scrutiny while still in office. And yet, he did not resign. Instead, Number 10 descended into siege. A bunker mentality took root. Staff were compelled to sign fresh non-disclosure agreements. Advisors were replaced overnight. Mobile phones were confiscated. The atmosphere was one of paranoia, fear, and inevitable collapse. The walls were closing in. The following day, Parliament erupted. The Speaker called for order more times in a single session than in the previous 6 months combined. A motion of censure was tabled with unprecedented speed, accusing the Prime Minister of breaching public trust and violating the ministerial code, the very code he once brandished as a moral compass. In one striking moment, a Conservative MP held aloft Starmer's 2020 campaign leaflet, which bore the promise of ethical socialism, and tore it in two on the floor of the House. Even Labour's own began to revolt. A backbencher, long considered loyal, rose to say, "I stood behind him because I believed him. Today, I stand ashamed." Then came the unthinkable. The judiciary, already uncharacteristically vocal, issued a second statement. The Chief Justice condemned continued efforts to obscure material facts, warning that any obstruction could lead to further legal consequences. International observers expressed quiet concern. Diplomats spoke of instability. Not a single foreign head of government released a statement in Starmer's defense. The silence was deafening. On the streets of Britain, the fury spilled over. Protests ignited across London, Birmingham, and Manchester. These weren't party loyalists or hardened ideologues. They were ordinary citizens, many of them first-time voters in 2019, chanting, "Resign. Liar." One interview, featuring an elderly war veteran outside Westminster, went viral. "I've seen liars in this place before," he said, "but never one who lied with such calm." Security was intensified around Number 10. Barricades were erected. Police presence was doubled, not to repel extremists, but to contain the wrath of a disillusioned public. Inside the Prime Minister's residence, chaos reigned. Ministers were locked out of strategy briefings. Communications collapsed. The once formidable Starmer operation had shrunk to a handful of die-hard loyalists clinging to a fantasy of survival. But what was left to fight for? The press had turned. The courts had turned. Even his own party had turned. Grassroots Labour offices were overwhelmed with resignations. Regional party leaders in Scotland and Wales held emergency meetings to discuss severing ties with the national leadership. And then, without sirens, without spectacle, came the final blow. Just after dawn, a letter was hand-delivered to the Speaker of the House of Commons. No podium. No cameras. Just one typed page, signed, Keir Starmer. In it, he cited the need to preserve public trust and protect the integrity of our institutions. He had resigned. The financial markets wobbled. Parliament braced for chaos. But across the nation, there were no celebrations, just a long, exhausted exhale. The damage had already been done. The trust had already gone. Sir Keir Starmer's legacy will not be remembered for reform or integrity. It will be a cautionary tale, a study in hubris, deceit, and the steep cost of broken promises. And beyond the headlines, in homes, cafes, and town halls across Britain, one phrase took root and echoed. Never again.